Duke fans, hello and welcome. We are episode number 185 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. We are coming to you over the weekend. We didn't have any games, but that doesn't mean that we didn't want to talk to each other and record some things for you. We've previewed this week's games against Pittsburgh and Syracuse, and we're going to do a little deep dive into the ACC in general and kind of who will make the tournament. But first, as always, I'm Donald Wine. I am captaining this ship this week, coming to you from what is an interesting Washington, D.C. right now. Right now, we also have Sam Klein. We have him in Durham, North Carolina. Sam, what's going on down in Durham?
It's sleepy in Durham. As you noted, no basketball games this weekend. So it was a little bit of time off for us from basketball, and everything else is good, man.
And from Atlanta, apparently now, unfortunately, in a world where UNC has won this decade, Jason Evans, how you feeling this morning?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the Tar Heels do have a victory now in the decade. I'm feeling pretty good this morning. I've got a nice hot cup of tea, so that's doing me well in the cold weather that we're experiencing.
Jason apparently forgetting the cardinal rule that if you bring something to show and tell, you bring enough everyone in the class. I
have a cold seltzer water today, and
I just have water.
There's more in the fridge if you need any.
My tea is,
put this in the chat.
My tea is acai berry tea. It is outstanding, and I put a ton of sugar in it. It's basically sugar water with a little bit of tea. So if you guys want to share in that,
my sugar.
Let's take a pause. You can go into your kitchen, get the hot water ready, and we can all share.
That's going to take a minute. But you know what? Let's go ahead and preview the games this week. We'll start with the game on Tuesday night, Pittsburgh in Cameron. To my recollection, guys, the first time since Jeff Capel took over that he will return to Cameron as the coach of the Panthers. I'm going to start with Jason. Jason, tell us what we should expect this week, at least on Tuesday night, when Capel and the Panthers come to Cameron.
So Pittsburgh is a team that a few days ago, I was sort of thinking to myself, I was looking ahead at the ACC, and I was like, this Pitt team could actually make some waves in the conference a little bit. It's not outside the realm of possibility. They've had a tough schedule, and they've got a tough schedule. They unfortunately are a team that just the scheduling gods did them no favor. They play Florida State twice. They play Louisville twice. They have Duke on the road. That's a really, really tough combination for any team in the conference. That said, this is a Pitt team that is capable of winning games against good teams, as demonstrated by the opening game, the very first game of the season. They beat Florida State. Now, look, Florida State, that's their only loss in the ACC. Florida State is a legit national title contender. They are absolutely, one of the front runners for the ACC title. If Pitt beat them, Pitt can beat anybody. But on the other hand, you look at some other Pitt results. Literally, the game after they beat Florida State, they lost to Nicholls State. Nicholls State is barely a top 200. In some metrics, they're not even a top 200 team. So this Pitt team is just hard to figure out exactly what they're going to be. They're very streaky. People who've watched a lot of their games say that this is a team that's capable of, going on a big run and going on a big drought, which is not a great thing. They're not a very good three-point shooting team. They're in the bottom 30 or so teams in the country, and hitting their three-pointers, only hitting 30% of their three-point shots is just not good. They are a terrible, terrible defensive rebounding team. I think that they are last in the country. They're like in the bottom 2 or 3 in the country at defensive rebounding. And obviously that is something we've talked all season, that offensive rebounds have been something that Duke has been really, really good at. And for this Pitt team to be a team that's so bad at defensive rebounding, Duke is exactly the kind of team that should be able to present them with some real problems. In terms of their players, their best players are all pretty much in the backcourt. Trey McGowan's, Xavier Johnson are probably their 2 top scorers, their 2 top players from the perimeter. They shoot a pretty fair number of 3-pointers. They're hitting a decent number of them. They've got a transfer named Ryan Murphy, who just bombs away from three. He typically comes off the bench, but he plays kind of starter minutes, and you can count on him to probably shoot at least 4 or 5 3-pointers in this game. And he's someone who's capable of getting hot and really shooting you out of the game. They don't have a lot up front. They don't have a lot of really, guys who are blocking a lot of shots or presenting real challenges on the boards. And I could see this being one of the games. A lot of people feel like Vernon Carey has struggled in recent games. If you look at the stats, he is not the player that Vernon Carey was in December, early January. He has not been through the middle of January. There's a freshman wall that these guys run into, and I think Vernon Carey is right up against that freshman wall. Pitt is the kind of team that he could really, really get healthy against. So I would say as long as Pitt isn't really successful from 3-point range, they take a lot of threes. If they're not really successful from 3-point range, they're probably going to really have a tough time staying within double figures of Duke, especially considering that the Blue Devils have had a week off. Time to recharge our batteries and really get ready for a strong push and some more challenging games, at least on paper, that are coming up.
Jason, you mentioned that Pittsburgh takes a lot of threes. Unfortunately for them, they don't make a lot of threes. So defending out there is important for Duke. But as you said, if this is a game where Vernon Carey is going to bounce back, Pittsburgh not being a great shooting team is a great opportunity for Carey to hopefully get more rebounds, not feel like he has to, even if Pitt's shooting a lot of threes, if Duke's defensive style is to sort of let them take bad shots and then clean up the rebounds, that could be a perfect opportunity for Carey to get more rebounds, play a little bit more of the defense that he wants to play, and start the break a little faster. That's the kind of game that I think Duke wants to see from him. And this is a Pitt team, as you mentioned, that is sort of up and down. They also recently almost lost to Boston College, who is bad. Don't lose to Boston College. You don't want to do that. So I think it's a good opportunity for Duke, especially at home, where it's obviously a little bit emotional for this team and for the coaching staff to play against Jeff Capel. Maybe they can contain that a little bit with playing the game in Cameron, although it is another one of these late starts on Tuesday night.
So really quick, Sam brought, and then Donald, because Sam brought it up, the loss to Boston College. I didn't harp on this enough. What a up and down team this Pitt team is. It's kind of unbelievable. They lost to Wake. You said they almost lost to Boston College.
They almost lost to Boston College.
Wait. They lost to Wake Forest, and it was a home game. They lost to Wake Forest at home, and you'd be like, "Oh my God, they must be terrible." But then they almost beat Louisville. They went to overtime with Louisville. It's like against the really good teams, the Florida States, the Louisvilles, they're really competitive. That's bad news for Duke. Against the bad teams, the Boston College, the Wake Forests, and the such, they lose those games. So it's kind of I can't figure them out. They could be dangerous, and they could also be terrible.
Despite all that, despite the inconsistency that you guys have mentioned, I'm looking at one thing. Jeff Capel is coming back to Cameron for the first time as Pitt's coach. And that is an intangible that Pitt has not had to deal with so far in his tenure. And I guarantee you that if there's a time where these guys are going to be on the higher end of that inconsistency, is going to be on Tuesday night, because you have to expect they're going to come in. And, we know Jeff Capel loves Duke. We know he's been a part of the program for a long time. He's won a couple national championships with us as a coach. This guy lives, breathes Duke, and he is the coach of the Panthers. But Pitt is going to want to come in and win this game for him. He's not going to say it, but I know his players are going to try and come in and win for him. So we have to expect that all of these things that we have, all these things where Pitt can't shoot well, they can't rebound well. We have to expect they're going to do all of these things extremely well on Tuesday night, and we have to be ready for that. I think our players will be ready, but we have to make sure we mind our P's and Q's, because Pitt is, like you said, they can be dangerous. They can play good teams really well. And if they do that on Tuesday night, we're not ready, this could be an upset in the making. So I think that's going to do it for Pitt, and we are going to move on to the game on Saturday night. We travel to Syracuse to take on the Orange. Sam, you've been taking a look at them. What can we expect on Saturday?
So we were talking about how Pittsburgh is sort of this weird up and down team. Syracuse is much more consistent. For where they rank in KenPom and in the net. They're sort of right in the 50s. They're 50 in KenPom right now, and they're 66 in the net. And their results to this point in the season would sort of bear that out. They've lost games to higher ranked opponents like Iowa, Penn State, these types of teams that are more solidly in the NCAA tournament conversation, and they've mostly beaten the teams that are beneath them. We're going to talk a little bit more in the next segment about kind of the rest of the ACC and the very wide ACC middle that's sort of like on the bubble, like on the wrong side, mostly on the wrong side of the bubble right now. Syracuse is in that group. They've got a couple losses in that group, but none that are so terrible. So taking a look at them individually, they're really led by two wing players who are most of their production, junior Elijah Hughes and then sophomore Buddy Boeheim, of course, Jim Boeheim's son. These are the guys who are kind of in charge of the offense, and the offense is pretty good for Syracuse. Both of these guys are better than 38% from three, so they're taking a lot of shots and making them, again, in contrast to the Pittsburgh team we were just talking about. So containing the 3-point shooting for Syracuse is going to be important. And then, of course, on the defensive side of the ball, Syracuse is not great this year at running the zone. Their defensive efficiency is pretty well down in the rankings, but it is a different challenge, the likes of which Duke hasn't really had to play against this year. So just like we talk about every year when we're about to see Syracuse, it's what is Duke's game plan going to be? And because the Duke personnel change a lot every year, we sort of come in with only limited knowledge about how Duke is going to attack the zone, which players are going to be most effective. And I think because of the changing nature of Duke's offensive game, different guys getting hot at different times, I don't think we really know what version of Duke we're going to see on offense. The most important thing is to contain Syracuse's 3-point shooters, because that's where they can do a lot of damage. But like I said, they're strong against the bad teams. They don't have any of these big wins yet. Duke coming to the Carrier Dome. I think they still call it the Carrier Dome. Maybe they didn't they rename it? Didn't they get a new?
I think it's still the Carrier Dome.
Sponsor? They were talking about getting a new sponsor.
I'll research real quick.
All right, Donald's doing the research.
Hang on, I don't care what Donald's research says. If it's the corporate sponsorship dome, I don't care. It's the Carrier Dome. It shall always be the Carrier Dome.
Carrier Dome is a corporate sponsor name, so we can change that. That's okay.
It is still the Carrier Dome.
It's still the Carrier Dome. All right.
Is it Carrier air conditioning?
Yes, yep. Carrier air conditioning.
I did not know that. I don't care. It's the Carrier Dome,
which is great for a dome. You know, it's a very logical sponsor. Did you see that the total tangent? Did you see that the Brewers lost Miller as the sponsor name, or that Miller lost the sponsorship to being Miller Park anyway? Totally off.
They announced that last year when I was at a game at Miller Park. Everyone was freaking out.
It's really terrible.
Awful.
It's the best. It's like one of the best corporate sponsor like tie-ins, and they lost it. Anyway, that's Miller's fault, not ours. So Syracuse still plays. I thought anyway. Regardless, most important thing for Duke in this game is to contain Syracuse's shooters. They had some good production from the inside in their recent win against Pittsburgh, but their offense really runs through the shooters. Duke should be able to match them up pretty well. And then on the offensive end, I'll give it to either of you. If you tell me what you think Duke's offensive game plan is, even day to day against normal defenses, I will commend you. Against the zone, I think it's a wait and see approach, and maybe we find out in the first 5 minutes of the game what it is. But given how many rotations there are, there's a lot of ways this game can go for Duke on the offensive end.
The great thing about the matchup zone is it throws many different looks at you. But the other thing is, on the offensive side, if you're facing a matchup zone, you kind of have to take what the defense gives you in the first few minutes of the game. So, it's not like a, packed in 2-3 where, they're going to be wings open and you can just shoot around it and hopefully you make all your threes. The matchup zone is going to be a guy that's still going to be in your face, but it deals a lot with communication and switch offs. So I think the idea is going to be to try and shoot over it, but it's going to be something where if there's an opening in the middle of the zone in the first few minutes of the game, Coach K is going to try and exploit that.
Yeah.
What I don't know is, and maybe Jason, you have an idea, is who the exact personnel are that are going to be performing that. Maybe, Jason, do you have an idea for that?
Yeah, and that's a huge key in this game. If you've watched Duke play Syracuse in the past, which we all have, what we generally try to do is you try and get a guy who's a smart decision maker and a decent passer and ball handler right there in the middle of the zone in the high post. That tends to be the spot that opens up, and you get the ball there, and usually they can see different angles of where to make things happen, either a pass to someone on the wing, a pass to someone in the low post, maybe even taking a short jumper themselves.
So who is that on this team?
You know who I would have pegged? I would have said that's going to be Wendell Moore. I think that would have been an absolutely ideal spot for him, especially because he was someone who was so capable of taking that ball and attacking the basket. I think it's probably Cassius Stanley with Wendell Moore not in there. And again, Cassius is going to, if you get Cassius in there, he is going to attack the basket. And that could be, I could see Cassius potentially having a huge game against Syracuse from that spot in the middle of the zone if he's the guy that goes there. Also, earlier in the year, Duke was doing a really nice job with Carey and Hurt, mostly Hurt, or Jack White, getting to that spot, feeding the high post into the low post. We talked about on the podcast earlier in the year that Duke was doing such a great job of going high-low post feeding. I could see Jack White, I could see Matthew Hurt doing a lot of that to Vernon Carey and potentially to Javin Delorier down low.
This is one of those instances where I wish we had one more game to see if the Matthew Hurt from last week is still Matthew Hurt of this week, if he's still active on offense, finding his spots, because that might indicate that he is going to thrive in this game against Syracuse.
I'm glad you mentioned Matthew Hurt, because he's the one that I think is the most intriguing person to put in that position. I think you're right. Cassius Stanley is probably the guy that makes the most sense. But if Matthew Hurt can get in that zone, the one thing about the matchup zone is that the mismatches are right there in the middle. And if you have Matthew Hurt, who's 6'10", he's not going to be going up against a guy his size. The way the matchup zone will shift around, he's going to end up with a guard that's 6'3", maybe 6'4", and he's going to be able to pop that all day. But the question is, Sam, yes, can he hit that shot? If we have the Matthew Hurt from last week, then the answer is yes, and we may see him more in that position. But if not, you're going to want the athleticism of someone like Stanley, who can shoot or also drive and create the mismatch on his own.
So the other thing I would say about Syracuse, just really quick, I feel like this is a different looking Syracuse team than we have seen in the past. Usually Syracuse is all these really, really long guys. This year, just the necessity of the roster, they've had to go with guys who are really good shooters. I mean, you already mentioned Buddy Boeheim. You did mention Joe Girard. Joe Girard's a guy that Duke recruited not that heavily, but Duke was after him some. He set the New York State high school scoring record. This is a guy who bombs from three. This Syracuse team will shoot from anywhere on the floor.
New York State, a state that used to produce a lot of good basketball players.
Used to, yes.
No New Yorkers on this podcast to get angry about me about
see it.
Comment.
In any event, my point was going to be those guys they're not particularly long. They aren't the typical Syracuse lengthy player that we've seen in the past. And it's interesting to see the way the team has adjusted, that Syracuse has adjusted to having different kind of personnel this year. And they seem to have figured it out lately. I mean, you pointed out, Sam, they've won 5 in a row in the ACC. There are not many teams that have done that.
Yeah, they've come on hot, I think, at the right time. And as my sort of preview for the next segment, I think Syracuse is actually, regardless of how the game goes this weekend, Syracuse is in a good position in the ACC. They have a fairly light schedule ahead of them. So they're probably looking at this as one of their big opportunities to make a statement to say, hey, maybe at the end of the season, they look like a 9, 10, 11 seed. A win against Duke, even if it is at the Carrier Dome, could be the thing that bumps them up into the into the other side of the 8th seed or something like that.
As always, this episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by those fine gentlemen at Bird Campbell, PA, with law offices in Florida and Texas. For any of your business legal needs, Bird Campbell means business. Check them out at birdcampbell.com, and we thank them for their continued support of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Okay, gentlemen, we had a little segue, and I think it's a good time to start discussing it. The games are over, and now let's take a deep dive at what we've seen so far in the ACC and what we think is going to happen moving forward with regards to the NCAA tournament. I think we can all agree that there are three teams that are kind of the class of the ACC so far this year. That'd be Duke, Florida State, and Louisville. Now the question is, who's number 4? Who's number 5?
Pause. Were those the 4 teams that we thought were going to be the class of the ACC at the beginning of the season?
Nope. Not at all.
Even to this point, I think 2 of those teams were clearly in the top.
Yeah, I mean,
Florida
Duke and
State.
Louisville. Duke and Louisville
were 1 and 2.
5.
Yeah.
What happened to UVA and UNC? Where'd those guys go?
I mean, we've talked about UNC. They have dominated our podcast long enough. We're going to slide them to the side. We're talking about the middle of the pack. They can't even say they're the middle of the pack right now.
That's not where UNC is these days.
That's not where they are. So, I mean, yes, we are talking about teams like, Pitt, Syracuse, who are playing this week, UVA, NC State. There's a lot of guys that are nestled right there in that peloton. Who is going to be – I'll start with you, Jason. Who do you think is going to be the team that we see in that 4th and 5th position at the end of the season?
So, and by the way, the reason we're talking about 4th and 5th is that I think the consensus is that the ACC is going to send 4, maybe 5 teams to the NCAA tournament, which is way different. I mean, look, in recent years, we've been guessing at, 8, 9 teams potentially making the NCAA tournament. And there is still a possibility, and it's not a crazy possibility, that the ACC only sends 3 teams to the dance, because all the rest of these teams keep on playing each other and losing games that you feel like they should have won. And as a result, they're all hovering around 500. And I don't think 500 in the ACC is not getting you in the NCAA tournament with the quality of the conference this year. In fact, remember, we're playing a 20-game schedule. I'm not even sure that 11-9 gets you in. It'll be close. If you're 11-9, you'll be on the bubble. I think if you're 12-8 in the conference, that's the mark. 12-8 gets you to the NCAA tournament, in my opinion. And I'm just not sure how many teams can get to 12-8. I mean, Syracuse is halfway there. Syracuse has 6 wins. Syracuse is 6-3. We already talked about Syracuse a little bit. Their schedule is very easy overall, and they've got a reasonably easy schedule in the back half here. And so, I mean, Syracuse.
But what's tough, Jason, for a team like Syracuse is, and this is what I was saying in the preview for our game coming up, they don't have that many opportunities, as none of the ACC teams do. They don't have that many opportunities for a really quality win. So they can keep beating up on the teams that are in the 60s, 70s, 80s in KenPom. I don't think that gives them a huge boost up into the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm. But also, here's the other thing. We're as you guys mentioned earlier, we're dealing with an ACC that we're doing 20 games this year for the first time. And I think that's a dynamic that we haven't really experienced, and we think we can predict what's going to happen, but I don't think we really know. Here's why. A lot of times when a team is 500 or so entering the ACC tournament, they have a couple of quality wins where they're saying, hey, just win one game in the ACC tournament, and you guys are solidly off the bubble.
That's Duke. That's Duke from a couple of years ago.
Yes,
when we won the ACC tournament, not being in a position of strength and having to play 4 games in 4 days.
In 4 days, right? And then you also have, I mean, even just like Syracuse has gotten to the tournament several times over the last decade because they were around 500, hovering at the bubble, entered the tournament, and then enter the ACC tournament, won a game or 2, and then that was the strength that got them in. So we still have that, and I think the ACC is still regarded high enough that if you're at 500 this year, 1 or 2 wins in the ACC tournament may get you in. But I think it also depends on the teams that you will be playing. If you're playing in that first day, yeah, you may be beating a team that's not very good. But that means the next day,
a Boston College or a Wake Forest, it doesn't mean anything.
Right. But that means the next day you are playing somebody who is considered pretty good. And if you beat that team, then that is another quality win that, especially when we talk about the NCAA tournament, they're always talking about the last 10, how you're doing at the point. Some of these teams can go on a run. And if they go on a run and hit that ACC tournament doing something, then there's a shot at maybe getting 6 or 7 teams in. I just don't think that we're looking at 8 or 9. I think that's out of the question.
Yeah, look, Donald, it's clear. There's no way 8 or 9, even 6, I think it's just not going to happen unless, 3 teams get incredibly hot and just start winning all their games.
It would have
Sam,
to be like 3 of the right teams, and all of them would have to be really good. And like the top 3 in the ACC would all have to fall off a little bit for that to happen.
Well, I don't even know about that. I mean, if you win all your games against the rest of the conference that is not named Duke, Louisville, and Florida State, you're making the NCAA tournament. There's no question about that. The problem is there's no one in the conference who's shown an ability to consistently win those big games. I mean, literally yesterday, we had NC State losing to Georgia Tech. Not an embarrassing loss, but if you're going to be a tournament team, kind of game, sort of the game that you should win. And we had Virginia Tech losing to Boston College. Well, that's a game you definitely should win. I had pegged Virginia Tech when we were coming into this conversation. Virginia Tech was the team that I was like, that's the club that's going to kind of rise up and surprise people. And look, most people thought Virginia Tech was going to be like 12th, 13th, or lower in the ACC. The fact that they are even in our conversation right now is a real testament to them. Their schedule down the stretch isn't super difficult, so I think they have a decent chance to maybe go on a little bit of a run here and maybe get close to 11 or 12 ACC conference wins. But God, that game yesterday, that when they lost to Boston College, it's just every one of these teams, maybe with the exception of Syracuse, the past 5 games that they've won, but all these other teams, I keep on looking at them and thinking, oh, this is their moment. This is when they're going to start to rise up and separate themselves from the pack. And then it doesn't happen. I mean, you've got 6 teams with 4 or 5 losses right now in the conference. It's the great unwashed middle. And I haven't seen anything from any of them that shows me this is a team that's going to be able to play consistently good basketball and become consistent enough to show themselves to be a tournament team. I guess it's Syracuse. Maybe it's NC State or Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I was actually Virginia. About to say
if Virginia can ever play any offense, it's Virginia, but they haven't so far.
Both NC State and Syracuse have shown that they are capable of like beating the bottom. It's the beating the top that they haven't done yet, and they don't get that many opportunities. I think both Syracuse and NC State. Well, if we're taking this sort of in summary, Jason already mentioned Virginia Tech. I think Syracuse, NC State, and UVA all have ways into the tournament from where they stand right now, but all need to prove something. They're, probably right on the bubble or maybe on the slightly wrong side of it, but there's a lot of time left in the season.
Sam, are you saying you think that you can't really make the NCAA tournament unless you have one of these high quality wins against a Duke?
I think you have to have one, because they break down when the committee's looking at this, they break down your schedule into these chunks, right? What they call the quadrants.
The quadrants. But I mean, wins against Syracuse and NC State, those are like top 50 teams. Virginia's about a top 50 team. I mean, wins against those kind of teams, even if you win on the road against a Virginia Tech,
right? So or
a Notre Dame.
The road games matter for those teams. But let's see. I'm looking at NC State's schedule. I guess they've got a close win at UVA, which is I think is
that's
more
a
impressive.
Tier 1 win. That's a Tier 1 win. Yeah,
is more impressive than we give it credit for. That's one. But home against Clemson, home against Miami, home against Notre Dame, like that's the rest of their schedule. Otherwise, it's road losses for NC State. So one win for them that kind of stands out, and that's a win that you would want to put like second or third on your list of wins, as opposed to like this is the only highlight from their season. And it's against, like, if UVA continues to fall off, then that win doesn't even look that good. So it's still pretty precarious grounds for NC State to be making the tournament, but they have opportunities against Duke and against Louisville, like to beat these teams. They get both Duke and Louisville in Raleigh, so that helps them because they get a little bit of the home crowd advantage. They also have to play Duke here in Cameron toward the end of the season. So they have opportunities ahead of them, but I still think they have to win at least one more of those higher quality games. UVA right now is like the only win worth talking about on NC State's schedule.
NC State has a tough schedule coming home, and the last thing I'll say about this, and then Donald, you can wrap it up. I firmly believe, I will go on the record right now. If you get to 12 wins in the ACC, you're making the NCAA tournament, unless you do something stupid like lose your first round game in the ACC tournament. If you get to 12 wins in the regular season, I think you're getting in, whether those wins come against Duke, Florida State, Louisville, or you just happen to be the team that wins a bunch of games against that other middle tier teams. Can anyone get to 12 wins? That's the question as far as I'm concerned.
So to wrap it up, I think when we're looking at this schedule and we're looking at the 20 game schedule, I should say, I'm comparing this also not just the ACC, but the other conferences as well. We've talked so much this year about how college basketball as a whole is down. And when you look at some of these conferences, they're just as bad as the ACC is. It's about perception. And even, we have the
dude, the Big Ten, the Big East, the Big 12, they're having good years.
But if you look at some of these teams, the individual teams, they're not. Like, look, I saw
all the teams in the Big Ten that are good, all have bad losses. So
yeah, everyone has a bad loss this year. Everyone, when you're looking at some of these wins aren't I guarantee you when they look at it, they're going to say, oh, these wins actually aren't that great, because again, I think as a whole, college basketball has been down this year. And I do think that the ACC has fallen, this year, but that's not saying that. I mean, I think the only conference that I could theoretically say has risen its level this year is the Pac-12. And the Pac-12 last year was terrible. So that is, everyone else has been about the same or worse this year, in my opinion.
Yes, the Pac-12 was horrible last year, and they're
fine now.
They're decent this year.
They're decent this year. Okay, have you paid attention to the Big Ten? There are 12 teams in the Big Ten. I'm serious about this. There are 12 teams in the Big Ten who had legitimate cases to make the NCAA tournament.
And there's also a very logical world where the highest team in the Big Ten is a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, I'm real clear. The Big Ten somehow has 12 teams that are ranked in the top 40 and 0 teams that are ranked in the top 10. They don't have it. There's not a single, sort of national championship contender in the Big Ten. But I absolutely think they're going to be teams that are going to. Does the Big Ten play an 18? Do they play 20? I think they play a 20-game schedule.
They must. There's 14 of them.
Yeah.
They're going to be teams that are going to be below 500 in the Big Ten who are still going to make the dance. We're talking about ACC teams need to go 12-8 in the Big Ten. If you can get to 9-11, I think you're making the dance, because there are so many.
Because you can be a 10 or 11 seed with that kind of record.
For sure. Yeah, the Big Ten is literally every team between the number 5 seed and the number 10 seed is going to be a Big Ten team.
Yeah, but I should say, I'm saying what I'm saying to say this. I don't think any conference really scares me, right? Like it's just like in previous years where everyone was talking about the Big East is so great. They brought in 10 out of 11 teams, and then all of them didn't make past the first weekend. This year it feels like that, where yes, the Big Ten could get 10, 11 teams if they want to, but none of them scare me, right? No team in the ACC scares me. We could lose to any of them, and we can beat all of them by 30. That is what college basketball is right now.
Ready to here we go. I'm walking down the Big Ten according to the net rankings, right? Mm-hmm. Michigan State is the top team. Then Maryland. Okay, I think most people expected both of those teams to be pretty good. Mm-hmm. And the third best team.
Give the numbers so people recognize the numbers, because the numbers are impressive. Like how many of these teams are in the top 30, top 40?
Right. Okay. The other team that's in the top 20 of the net for the Big Ten, do you know who it is? There are 3.
Illinois.
Michigan State, Maryland. Nope. I'll give you a hint. You should guess this team last normally from the Big Ten.
State.
It's Rutgers.
Yeah, I said Rutgers.
Yeah, Rutgers.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what? I haven't watched Rutgers play, so I'll
I haven't
take
either.
that one.
I don't know what's going on with Rutgers.
Oh yeah, Rutgers and Penn State are legit this year. Are absolutely legit this year. Rutgers is 6-3 in the Big Ten, and they've got some good wins. In fact, Syracuse or someone in the ACC, someone in the ACC beat Rutgers, and that's going to be the best win on their resume.
Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the ACC, I think This always happens every year. We talk about, either we're really good or we're not as good, but there's going to be one or two teams in the middle of that pack that are going to start to make a run. Who are those teams going to be? I have no idea this year. Usually you could kind of predict who is going to be that team that kind of goes on a tear. But there's going to be a couple. Just the way the schedule lines up, just like we have our January swoon in February, someone is going to soar that's not named Duke. Who is that team going to be? And I think that is going to help carry some of the rest of the teams up, because if they've beaten them in the past, again, a team that you beat at the beginning of the season that was terrible, if they're good at the end of the year, that loss looks better. Same thing for wins. And I think at the end of the day, we'll probably get maybe 5 or 6. We're not going to get 8 or 9, so we don't have to worry about that. But we sometimes end up around 6 or 7 teams. And I think that in the end of the day, we will end up around that number.
Jason, it was Pittsburgh that beat Rutgers.
Okay, so Donald, you're wrong. The ACC is not getting 6 or 7 bids.
I also predicted 7 in my prediction, so I'm just staying consistent.
6 tops. It's really probably 4 or 5.
Yes, I think 6 is not happening. I'm hoping for 4 at this point.
There will be a 4th team because someone will emerge out of it. That's
probably. Yeah, I think 4 for sure, 5 maybe, 6 and 7.
Watch these mid majors if they start slipping.
You know how the ACC doesn't get 4 teams in is if Cole Anthony comes back for UNC and then UNC goes on a run that doesn't get them into the tournament but puts them ahead of all these other teams that we've been talking about.
Amen. I think you're right. That's exactly that's the scenario where there are teams that get to maybe 11 and 9 and no one gets to 12 and 8 and forget about it.
So UNC currently behind Stephen F. Austin. UNC is currently behind Stephen F. Austin in the net. I looked it up just to be sure. So, whatever.
Beat them twice, then they won't make that run.
That's fine. We can do that.
Okay, guys, for our last thing, we're kind of foregoing parting shots this week and kind of lumping it all into one last story. The NCAA president, Mark Emmert, said that, we're talking about paying players. We're talking about the consensus of whether we pay players, how we do it. And he had a really good address, at least, where he focused comments on this particular issue. Jason, I want to take it to you because you brought this to us and we were talking before the thing. So tell us about what Mark Emmert said and how that will affect the dynamic of college basketball.
So Mark Emmert Thursday evening talked about, to the end, it's like some NCAA leadership committee of some sort.
Basically his State of the Union.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. Yes. And he talked about name, likeness, and image. And he said that there is a special committee that is working on how they work name, likeness, and image rules into the current NCAA rules, how they allow players to profit off their name, likeness, and image while not breaking the amateur model. And let's not get into a discussion. I actually think the amateur model probably should be broken. So, hey, that's life. But what I thought was very interesting was he said, there's a clear consensus that we must get these rules changed. And at the same time, though, there's no clear consensus about how we change them. And I want to be I'm like, Mark, you just stated the obvious that everyone knows. If you can't provide any other insight than that, I don't even know what you're doing, man. Apparently, the thing they're working on the most right now, they've broken it down into 3 categories: individual licensing, group licensing, and work product. Individual licensing would be Zion Williamson goes out and makes an individual sponsorship deal, endorsement deal on his own. Group licensing, which I hadn't thought about, which is a really interesting and I really like this idea a lot. That's the notion of the Duke basketball team. As a team, all the players get together and they do a licensing deal. Hi, we're the Duke basketball team. And then work product is where apparently the NCAA has been working the most. And that's where the player actually does something, not just their name and likeness. So that's where the player maybe teaches lessons where the player has their own business of some sort, or more specifically, where the player gets money for their social media following. And Mark Emmert said that work product is the place that's most likely to see changes in the future. And I actually think that's sort of to some extent, that's the easiest one to dip your toe in the pool, because it makes the most sense. I mean, the way we are right now, players literally can't earn money from anything. If there's a kid who's a great math student at Duke and someone says to him, "I'll pay you to tutor my child," you can't do the same thing if you're a basketball player. You can't tutor someone in basketball. You can't work at a basketball camp or anything like that. You can't coach a basketball team on the side.
I mean, you can. You just can't get paid for it.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Right. Yeah. To be more specific,
you can do whatever you want.
Right. You just can't earn anything for it. And obviously the social media following is a very big deal. The idea that Zion Williamson could not get sponsors for his social media feed, dude would have been making major bank if he could have. But it just seems ridiculous. I'm glad the NCAA is looking at this. It's definitely an area that feels like this is where they could start the process. It's also an area where for sure there's going to be problems if they really want to keep things on the up and up. I mean, if you allow folks to teach lessons, then some booster's going to say, "Hey, Zion, will you teach my son how to shoot free throws? I'll pay you $1,000 an hour." So it's problematic, but at least the NCAA is looking at this a little bit, and they're making some strides.
I think the logical conclusion to this has to be like a total undoing of their model, as opposed to this incremental thing that Emmert is looking at. The question is, when do the incremental changes stop and the big changes start? That's where Mark Emmert probably isn't leading the organization anymore, and that they come to the conclusion that they have to have other people driving the new system here. But I don't think we're seeing that soon, because the college presidents who are ostensibly Mark Emmert's board of directors are under little pressure individually to make these wholesale changes.
I think the one thing yes, it's good that they're looking at it, color me skeptical, and that they're going to do the right thing, or even get to a point where it'll match some of the legislation that's been passed in California and other places, or at least being considered in other places. And so I think that's the problem. I think my gut tells me that they're going to do something, but it's going to fall short, and then we're going to have to revisit this conversation again and again and again. That's what's the problem with the incremental phase of doing this, is instead of just wholesale making this change and really just ripping the Band-Aid off of the problem and putting a new one on, they're just going to try and put a little ointment around the sides and hope that this whole thing still sticks. That's the real issue for me, and they haven't shown so far that they're willing to make the changes that are necessary to make this problem go away. They're just hoping that if they apply it, piece by piece, that this house of cards will still stand. And I think that's the real, that's where I'm skeptical. And yes, it's good that they're looking at it. We'll see what comes of it.
So there are a couple of dates that people need to have in mind as they think about all of this. In April, this committee that Emmert has put together is going to have a report to the NCAA Board of Governors. We will know a lot more about what recommendations they are making and what changes they are making in April. The other date, of course, is 2023, which is when the California law goes into place, where California says either you let players make money off of name, likeness, and image, or they are not going to be part of the NCAA anymore. Actually, what California said was, we're going to allow it to happen inside our borders. If you go to a California school, you can do this. And the NCAA would then have to figure out how the heck to make California's rules fit with the rest of the NCAA. Everyone knows that 2023 date for the California law is the ticking clock that there must be a solution by then. If there's not a solution by then, the NCAA falls apart, in my opinion. It just doesn't work anymore. And other states, you're going to see over the next several months, other states are going to put the same legislation in place. So this, in April, when they come back with this report, I think that's going to be the big moment where we sort of begin to see the pathway that the NCAA is going to take to get to where California requires them to be in 2023. What we got so far is an idea from Mark Emmert that the first step is probably going to be this notion of work product, things like social media endorsement and and lessons and that kind of thing, with the actual sponsorship, name, likeness, and image sponsorship stuff coming a little bit further down the road. But I think the big changes we will hear about, there will be big changes, I suspect, when they make this announcement in April, when they have this report. And I bet the NCAA implements those changes almost immediately. Usually they would wait a while. I think there's such a timeline working on them that right now that they're going to have to implement these things like for the next school year. So starting next fall, I bet you'll see some kind of way that players are making money off of work product.
Well, I hope you're right, Jason. It'll be something that certainly we will watch over the next few weeks and months. But for now, I think that will do it for this episode 185 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. As always, we would like to thank Berg Campbell for their sponsorship and for their trust in us. Again, thank you guys, Sam and Jason, for being with me this week. I am Donald Wine. For those of you out there, we will be back soon after probably next week after the games are done. But for now, Duke Band, take us home.